The largest dog that ever lived was not a wolf. It was not a dire wolf. It belonged to a branch of the dog family so different from anything alive today that its name, Epicyon, translates from ancient Greek to something close to more than a dog. Around 10 million years ago, the plains of North America were warmer, greener, and filled with animals that no longer exist. Three-toed horses moved through open grasslands. Rhinoceroses with barrel-shaped bodies gathered near rivers. Camels native to North America stood nearly 3 meters tall, which is about 10 feet. And moving through this world was a predator unlike any canid alive today. The largest species of Epicyon reached approximately 2.4 meters in length, which is about 8 feet, stood around 90 centimeters at the shoulder, that is nearly 3 feet, and the largest individuals may have weighed around 170 kg, about 375 pounds. Its skull looked less like that of a modern wolf and more like something built for raw power. Its jaws and teeth were adapted to process bone, giving Epicyon access to nutrient-rich marrow locked inside carcasses after other predators had taken what they could. But Epicyon was not an evolutionary accident. It was the culmination of an entire dynasty of bone-crushing dogs that dominated North America for millions of years, while the ancestors of today's wolves, coyotes, foxes, and domestic dogs remained smaller players in the background. Then the balance changed. After millions of years of success, Epicyon disappeared. The bone-crushing dynasty vanished with it, while the overlooked branch of the dog family survived and eventually inherited the continent. Today, we're going back into that lost world to understand how the largest dog ever known rose to dominate prehistoric North America, what made its jaws unlike those of any living canid, and how an animal built for such extraordinary success could disappear completely. If this is your kind of thing, hit like and subscribe. It costs nothing, and it keeps this channel going. Now, we step into the North America that created it, a continent almost unrecognizable from the one we know today. Across millions of years, a continent can become so thoroughly transformed that even its oldest rivers lose their familiar paths. During the Miocene epoch, stretching from roughly 23 million years ago until 5.3 million years ago, North America belonged to such a different chapter of Earth that almost every horizon carried forms of life without a living counterpart. This was the longest epoch of the Cenozoic era, and among its defining features was an astonishing abundance of mammals. More large mammal species shared these landscapes than at almost any other point before or since, creating an ecological richness that later ages would never quite match. The continent itself remained incomplete by modern standards. South America still stood apart, separated by open water that prevented the great exchange of animals that would come much later. Along the western edge, the Rocky Mountains continued their gradual rise, reshaping weather patterns as each passing age lifted new ridges toward the sky. Warm air reached deep into the southern regions, while temperate woodlands spread across broad interior valleys. Between clusters of trees, sweeping grasslands expanded year after year, offering fresh grazing ground beneath changing seasons. Among those open spaces moved creatures that belonged entirely to this land. Apicamelus wandered with a neck so long that it often drew comparison with a giraffe, though it followed its own distinct evolutionary path. Standing close to 10 feet at the shoulder, it browsed leaves that smaller herbivores could never reach, drifting between scattered woodland and open plain with an easy stride. Its towering outline became one of the defining silhouettes of the Miocene landscape, rising above grasses stirred by steady winds. Near rivers and marshy ground, teleoceras gathered in remarkable numbers. This rhinoceros carried a broad barrel shaped body supported by surprisingly short legs, giving it an appearance that recalled a modern hippopotamus more than any living rhinoceros. Fossil beds preserving thousands of individuals reveal how common these heavy grazers once were. Their repeated presence across ancient floodplains suggests a landscape where entire herds shared dependable water sources through countless generations. Farther into the grasslands, Neo-Hipparion crossed the plains in flowing bands, smaller than today's horses, and supported by three toes instead of one hoof. These agile herbivores traveled together with remarkable coordination. Their movement rippled across the prairie like waves passing through tall grass, each herd responding instantly to shifting scents, distant sounds, and subtle changes carried on the breeze. Every one of these remarkable animals had evolved on North American soil. They were not travelers from distant continents. Their ancestors had adapted here over immense spans of time, shaping and being shaped by the same landscapes that surrounded them. Sharing that world was a community of predators unlike any found today. Saber-toothed cats occupied one place within it. Bear dogs claimed another. Above them stood the bone-crushing dogs, members of a powerful canid lineage that had refined its place through nearly 30 million years of evolution. Their rise formed one of the longest continuous stories among North America's great carnivores, leaving behind a dynasty whose reach extended across ages measured in millions of years. Some discoveries reshape an entire story with a single fact. Among the most surprising is that the family of animals we know as dogs did not begin in Europe nor in Asia. Their earliest ancestors appeared in North America around 40 million years ago, making this continent the birthplace of every living dog, wolf, fox, coyote, and jackal. The roots of the family Canidae reach into North American rock layers as deeply as many of the landscapes that still define the continent today, tying their history to the land where they first learned to survive. That long history unfolded through three great branches, each leaving a different mark upon the world. The first was Hesperocinae, the founding lineage. These early canids were modest animals, ranging from the size of a fox to that of a small coyote. They explored forests and open country with adaptable diets and flexible habits, forming the evolutionary foundation from which every later member of the family would emerge. Their own story eventually came to an end, yet every branch that followed carried traces of their beginning. From that foundation arose Borophaginae, the lineage that transformed the family into one of North America's dominant groups of predators. Across approximately 31.5 million years, this branch expanded into 66 confirmed species, each adapted to changing climates, shifting prey, and evolving competitors. Their remarkable success allowed them to occupy ecological roles that stretched from opportunistic omnivores, scarcely larger than foxes, to confident hunters approaching the size of wolves. Their history did not move in a straight line. Generation after generation, natural selection produced forms that became stronger, heavier, and increasingly specialized until the lineage reached an extraordinary summit. Alongside this flourishing dynasty lived the third branch, Caninae. At first glance, these animals appeared far less impressive. They remained comparatively small, broad in diet, and flexible in behavior. For millions upon millions of years, they occupied opportunities left available by their larger relatives, surviving without commanding the same ecological influence. Every living member of the dog family belongs to this branch, yet for much of its early history, it existed beneath the shadow cast by Borophaginae, waiting through immense spans of time before circumstances would finally favor its descendants. The scale of the bone-crushing lineage is difficult to overstate. Fossil deposits from many parts of North America reveal Borophaginae as the most common large predators of their age, appearing more frequently than any competing carnivore group. Their dominance persisted across changing environments and countless generations, creating one of the longest lasting predator dynasties known among mammals. Few carnivore families have maintained such continuity while producing such remarkable diversity within a single continent. Their scientific name offers an equally revealing glimpse into their identity. Borophaginae comes from Greek words meaning bone eating, combining a term for devouring with another describing the act of eating. It was more than a label chosen by paleontologists. It reflected the defining feature that separated this lineage from every other branch of the dog family and ultimately shaped its greatest achievements. At the far end of that immense evolutionary journey stood Epicyon, the largest and most formidable expression of everything the dynasty had become, bone eating. The name hints at an ability unlike anything possessed by ordinary dogs. What bone crushing truly required, what opportunities it opened, and how it helped build an empire across North America is a story that becomes clear only when the jaws themselves come into view. Every large predator living across the Miocene plains faced the same physical limit. Bringing down prey demanded strength, speed, and well timed precision. Once the animal had fallen, muscle, organs, and softer tissues offered an enormous meal. Then the feast reached a barrier. The thick leg bone of a full grown Epicyon, weighing roughly 1,300 pounds, was not merely another piece of the skeleton. It was a dense column of mineral reinforced tissue built to support tremendous weight. Wolves could not split it. Saber-toothed cats could not open it. Even powerful bears struggled to unlock what remained inside. Hidden within that fortress rested fat-rich marrow, one of the most concentrated sources of energy available anywhere in the ecosystem. The bone-crushing dogs evolved an answer unlike any other branch of the dog family. Their skulls gradually changed shape through countless generations until they functioned less like slicing tools and more like carefully engineered presses. The front of the snout became shorter and noticeably deeper. This seemingly modest adjustment altered the mechanics of the jaw by placing the largest crushing teeth closer to the jaw joint, the point where force is transferred most efficiently. The principle resembles gripping a pair of pliers close to the hinge instead of squeezing at the tips. Less movement produced far greater pressure. Those forces converged upon enlarged fourth premolars, teeth built for compression instead of cutting. Carnivores that specialize in slicing flesh depend on blade-shaped teeth that pass neatly across one another. The bone-crushing dogs followed another path. Their reinforced premolars tolerated repeated impacts against hard material without failing under the strain. Rather than making a clean slice, they concentrated enormous pressure onto bone until its structure finally yielded. The rest of the skull changed as well. A pronounced dome rose across the frontal bone, creating more than a distinctive profile. Each powerful bite sent stress through the skull, and those forces had to travel somewhere. The curved surface spread that pressure across a broader area, reducing the chance of structural failure. Engineers rely upon similar principles when designing arches that distribute weight instead of allowing it to gather at a single weak point. Evolution reached a comparable solution through natural selection, producing a skull prepared to withstand repeated crushing loads. The jaw joint itself became equally robust. Reinforced surfaces helped stabilize the mandible during compressive bites that would place extraordinary stress upon an ordinary canid. Together, these features formed a system in which every major component supported the next. allowing immense force to be delivered again and again across an animal's lifetime. The fossils preserve the results with remarkable clarity. Teeth belonging to Epicyon display broad, polished surfaces and deep patterns of wear, concentrated where crushing occurred most often. These marks do not suggest occasional contact with bone. They record years of habitual processing, each meal leaving another small signature upon the enamel. Even fossilized droppings attributed to members of Borophaginae contain abundant fragments of digested bone, revealing digestive chemistry much like that of modern hyenas, capable of extracting nourishment from material that most carnivores leave behind. When other predators finished feeding and moved away from the skeleton of a fallen apicamelus, Epicyon could still approach with access to nourishment that remained sealed inside the largest bones. This jaw did far more than feed a predator. It sustained an empire. Around 12 million years ago, that long evolutionary experiment reached its greatest expression. Its name was Epicyon haydeni, and its immense proportions surprised the first scientists who uncovered its fossil remains. Names sometimes preserve the first impression of discovery. In the case of Epicyon, the name itself became an admission that paleontologists were looking at something larger than the familiar image of a dog. Derived from Greek words meaning beyond and dog, the name can be understood as more than a dog. It reflected an animal that stretched the boundaries of what scientists expected from the canid family. The bones fit within that family tree, yet their proportions hinted at a creature that occupied a place unlike any living relative. The genus contained 3 recognized species, each representing a different point along its evolutionary path. Epicyon savis was the most widespread and the most commonly discovered, reaching a size comparable to a modern wolf or somewhat larger. Epicyon aeolurodontoids occupied an intermediate position and remains less completely known because fossil material is comparatively scarce. Towering above them stood Epicyon haydeni, the largest member of the genus and the species that has earned recognition as the largest canid known from the fossil record. It represents the culmination of millions of years of evolutionary refinement within the bone-crushing lineage. Imagining its presence is easier than memorizing measurements. From the tip of its nose to the end of its tail, Epicyon haydeni stretched nearly 8 feet. Picture an ordinary hallway and count roughly 2.5 adult walking paces. That distance captures the length of the animal standing before you. At the shoulder, it rose close to 3 feet, placing its back near the hip of an average adult person. Meeting its gaze would require little movement of your head because its eyes rested remarkably close to your own. Weight completed the impression. Most adults likely ranged between about 220 and 275 pounds, while the largest confirmed individual approached 375 pounds. That exceeded the weight of an average male gorilla and surpassed the combined mass of 2 average gray wolves. Every movement carried the momentum of a predator built for overwhelming physical force rather than graceful endurance. Its skull remains the feature that most often surprises those encountering it for the first time. Modern dogs and wolves are usually recognized by long, narrow muzzles, yet Epicyon haydeni departed dramatically from that familiar outline. The face was shortened and deep, the forehead strongly domed, and the jaws remarkably broad. Many paleontologists have remarked that its skull creates an unexpected resemblance to that of a lion more than to any living dog. The overall shape challenges instinctive expectations, producing an animal that appears both familiar and strikingly different at the same moment. The rest of the skeleton matched that powerful design. Like modern dogs, it walked upon its toes, allowing swift acceleration whenever speed became necessary. Its proportions, however, reveal an animal that favored explosive bursts instead of the sustained endurance running associated with gray wolves. Thick limb bones, a robust chest, and substantial muscle attachments suggest strength remained its greatest advantage whenever prey had to be subdued or valuable carcasses defended. Epicyon haydeni lived from approximately 12 million years ago until about 5.3 million years ago, surviving for nearly 7 million years. The genus itself endured for roughly 15 million years, a span far longer than the existence of our own genus, Homo, which has occupied Earth for only about 2.8 million years. An animal of this scale, carrying such extraordinary jaws, required prey worthy of its abilities, and the grazing mammals of Miocene North America provided exactly that. The size of a predator is only part of its story. The animals it regularly confronted reveal far more about its capabilities than any skeleton alone. Fossil sites such as Coffee Ranch in Texas and the Miocene deposits of Nebraska place Epicyon haydeni alongside an extraordinary community of herbivores, many weighing between roughly 880 pounds and more than 1,500 pounds. For a predator whose average body mass reached about 220 to 275 pounds, those numbers carry remarkable implications. Pursuing prey several times heavier demanded exceptional strength, effective hunting strategies, or cooperation with others. The landscape itself became a proving ground where only highly capable predators could succeed. Among the most distinctive residents stood Apicamelus, often called the giraffe camel because of its unusually long neck. Despite its resemblance to modern giraffes, it belonged to a uniquely North American branch of camel evolution and was not the product of any recent connection with the camels living today. Rising to nearly 10 feet at the shoulder before the neck extended even higher, it browsed leaves beyond the reach of most grazing mammals. Adults likely weighed between about 880 pounds and more than 1,500 pounds, giving them an imposing presence wherever woodland met open country. That towering neck offered clear advantages. Elevated feeding reduced competition with shorter herbivores, while its height allowed an excellent view across the surrounding landscape. Many predators would have struggled to reach such a target or to force an adult animal off balance. Against a large bone-crushing canid, equipped with exceptional power and supported by companions, however, height alone could no longer guarantee safety. What seemed an impressive defense under ordinary circumstances became only one factor in a much larger contest. Another giant occupied wetter environments where rivers and floodplains supported abundant vegetation. Teleoceras differed dramatically from living rhinoceroses. Its body was broad and barrel-shaped, carried upon remarkably short legs that gave it an appearance often compared with a modern hippopotamus. Paleontologists have uncovered thousands of its fossils in certain Miocene deposits, indicating that these heavy herbivores flourished across extensive portions of North America. Larger individuals approached about 2,200 pounds, presenting a challenge that would have exceeded the abilities of nearly any solitary carnivore. Their compact build favored stability over speed, a characteristic that likely influenced every encounter with large predators. Across the expanding grasslands traveled Neohipparion, one of the three-toed horses that flourished during the Miocene. Smaller than modern horses, yet remarkably swift, these grazing animals depended upon alert senses and coordinated herd movement whenever danger appeared. Fossils of Neohipparion and Epicyon occur together at numerous locations throughout the Great Plains, revealing that predator and prey shared the same environments for millions of years. Unlike the heavier browsing mammals, these horses tested acceleration, pursuit, and precise timing instead of overwhelming strength alone. Smaller herbivores completed the menu. The peccary prosthenops and the graceful pronghorn kazarix occupied the lower end of the prey spectrum. They probably offered opportunities for younger individuals, the smaller species Epicyon savis, or adults living through seasons when larger prey proved more difficult to secure. Together, these animals formed an ecosystem whose scale has few modern parallels. Camels taller than any living horse, rhinoceroses built like massive grazing tanks, swift, three-toed horses, and numerous smaller mammals all shared the same continent. Bringing down prey of this magnitude invites another question, one that continues to shape scientific discussion. Evidence suggests that Epicyon may not have faced such challenges alone. One of the most intriguing questions surrounding Epicyon cannot be answered by a fossil alone. Bones preserve shape, teeth record wear, and fossilized droppings reveal diet. Yet none of these preserve a hunt as it unfolded across the Miocene landscape. No skeleton can show whether another animal ran beside it. No jaw can reveal whether companions surrounded prey from different directions. Because behavior leaves so few traces, paleontologists must assemble evidence, much like investigators examining scattered clues that survived millions of years. The first clue comes from the size of the animals found alongside Epicyon in the fossil record. Many likely prey species greatly outweighed even the largest individuals of this formidable canid. Adult Teleoceras, for example, could approach about 2,200 pounds. Bringing down an animal of that size would have placed extraordinary demands upon a predator weighing only a fraction as much. Modern carnivores offer a useful comparison. African wild dogs, each relatively modest in size, regularly capture prey many times heavier than themselves through careful coordination. Their success depends less upon the strength of a single individual than upon the combined efforts of an organized group. The relationship between predator size and prey size suggests that Epicyon may have relied upon a similar strategy when confronting the largest herbivores of its world. Its skeleton offers another piece of the puzzle. The limbs were strong and heavily built, suited to rapid bursts of power but less specialized for the prolonged chases practiced by modern gray wolves. Wolves can pursue prey across long distances with remarkable efficiency, maintaining a steady pace until exhaustion favors the hunters. The proportions of Epicyon point toward a different style of predation. Dense woodland edges and open grasslands could have supported brief ambushes, while coordinated movement among several hunters would reduce the need for any single animal to sustain an extended pursuit. The broader history of the dog family also deserves attention. Many living canids display rich social behavior, forming family groups that cooperate while hunting, defending territory, and raising young. Gray wolves, African wild dogs, and deholes each illustrate different expressions of this shared tendency. Although millions of years separate them from Epicyon, their behavior demonstrates that cooperation has deep evolutionary roots within the family. This pattern cannot prove how an extinct species behaved, yet it provides a framework that fits comfortably with the ecological evidence. Fossil localities contribute another observation. At sites including Coffee Ranch in Texas and several Miocene deposits in Nebraska, remains of more than one Epicyon have been discovered within the same general deposits. Such associations do not prove that the animals traveled together during life, since rivers, floods, and other natural processes can gather bones from different places and times. Even so, These discoveries remain consistent with the possibility that multiple individuals shared portions of the same landscape more closely than strictly solitary predators might. Taken together, none of these clues settles the question by itself. Each carries limitations that scientists readily acknowledge. When considered as a whole, however, prey size, skeletal design, evolutionary history, and fossil associations all point in a similar direction. For that reason, cooperative hunting remains the leading working hypothesis for Epicyon, supported by converging evidence while still leaving room for future discoveries to refine the picture. To understand Epicyon, it helps to look beyond the animal itself and examine the company it kept. The Miocene plains and woodland margins of North America supported an astonishing collection of large predators living at the same time. Few places on Earth today contain such a crowded assembly of formidable carnivores sharing one landscape. Every successful hunt carried consequences that extended well beyond the hunter that made the kill, because several rivals might appear before the meal had ended. One of the best windows into this world comes from Coffee Ranch in Texas, where fossils preserve a remarkable gathering of predators alongside the herbivores they pursued. The site reveals that Epicyon occupied an ecosystem where strength alone could never guarantee a meal. Every carcass represented an opportunity that attracted multiple species, each equipped with a different solution to the same challenge of survival. Among those rivals was Barborophilus lavorum, a member of an extinct group known as the Nimravids. Although often compared with saber-toothed cats, Nimravids belonged to their own separate lineage. Barborophilus approached the size of a modern jaguar and carried elongated upper canine teeth capable of delivering deep, carefully placed bites. Its body was heavily built, favoring close-range ambush over prolonged pursuit. Concealed among woodland edges, it relied upon patience until prey wandered within striking distance. Sharing portions of the same environment was Amphimacharidus coloradensis, a true saber-toothed cat belonging to the Machaerodont lineage. Larger than Barborophilus, it possessed an athletic frame and long canine teeth adapted for dispatching substantial prey after a successful ambush. Rather than competing through identical methods, these predators divided the landscape by emphasizing different hunting strategies, reducing direct overlap while still meeting at valuable carcasses. Large omnivores added another layer of competition. Agriotherium, an immense prehistoric bear known from several Miocene localities, possessed the size and confidence to challenge other carnivores for food. A bear arriving at an unfinished carcass could force difficult decisions upon even experienced predators. Confrontation carried obvious risks, and surrendering a meal sometimes proved the wiser choice. Competition also came from within the bone-crushing lineage itself. Borophagus, a smaller, close relative of Epicyon, belonged to the same evolutionary branch of dogs. Similar diets meant similar ambitions, and encounters between members of this family likely revolved around access to carcasses, territory, and favorable hunting grounds. Rivalry did not always come from strangers. Sometimes it arrived wearing a familiar face. Within such a crowded predator community, the ability to extract nourishment after others had finished became a remarkable advantage. Flesh disappeared quickly wherever numerous carnivores gathered, yet the skeleton retained rich stores of marrow protected by dense bone. The crushing jaws of Epicyon unlocked that resource long after slicing teeth had reached their limits. Its feeding strategy therefore served two purposes at once. It harvested food unavailable to many competitors while reducing the need to contest every meal directly. This ecological balance did not remain unchanged forever. During the Miocene, new predators entered North America across the Bering Land Bridge from Asia. Their arrival was modest at first, and they did not immediately displace the established bone-crushing dogs. Even so, they introduced a different approach to predation, one built upon anatomical traits and hunting techniques that gradually reshaped the continent's competitive landscape. Over immense spans of time, those newcomers would become increasingly influential members of the Predator Guild. No dynasty remains alone forever. Across millions of years, continents that had evolved in relative isolation gradually found new connections, allowing animals to cross boundaries that had once seemed permanent. North America had long belonged to the bone-crushing dogs and their relatives, yet another lineage was following its own path far away across Eurasia. Their meeting would reshape the balance of predators, although the change unfolded so gradually that no single generation could have recognized it. The family Felidae first appeared in Eurasia roughly 33 million years ago, several million years after the Borophaginae had already become established in North America. For about 15 million years, these two remarkable groups occupied different worlds, responding to different prey, climates, and competitors. Each lineage refined its own solution to the challenges of hunting. One emphasized powerful jaws, capable of breaking the hardest bones, while the other gradually perfected a body designed for swift, precise attacks. Their histories unfolded independently until geography finally brought them together. Around 18.5 million years ago, an early cat known as Suda elurus crossed the Bering Land Bridge, linking what is now Eastern Asia with Alaska. This migration introduced the ancestor of all living cats into a continent where true felids had been absent for millions of years. Earlier false saber-toothed predators had disappeared roughly 26 million years ago, leaving a lengthy interval during which no genuine member of the cat family occupied North America. During that absence, the bone-crushing dogs expanded into many of the ecological opportunities once shared with other large carnivores, becoming deeply established within their environment before the newcomers arrived. The advantages carried by these early cats were subtle at first glance, yet profound in practice. Their claws remained withdrawn while walking, protected from constant contact with the ground. Because the tips stayed sharp, each strike delivered exceptional grip at the moment prey attempted to escape. Flat-clawed canids depended largely upon traction from their feet and the force of their jaws after making contact. Cats secured their hold with both teeth and hooked claws, creating a different sequence during every attack. Their backbone also moved in a distinctive way. Flexible vertebrae allowed the body to compress and extend through a powerful bounding gallop, lengthening each stride as muscles released stored energy. Instead of relying upon steady endurance over great distances, this design favored explosive acceleration, capable of closing the final gap between hunter and prey within only a few moments. Once contact had been made, specialized slicing teeth separated flesh with impressive efficiency. The bone-crushing dogs extracted nourishment from an entire skeleton, but cats invested less effort processing bone and more energy securing fresh meat before competitors arrived. Another difference lay in social strategy. Most members of the cat family hunted alone, reducing the amount of food required to sustain a successful predator. A solitary hunter could survive on prey too small to satisfy an entire group, providing flexibility whenever environmental conditions became less predictable. Even so, the arrival of Suda elurus did not immediately displace the established Borophagine dogs. Fossil sites preserve evidence that both lineages shared North American habitats for millions of years, occupying overlapping landscapes while emphasizing different methods of survival. As climates gradually shifted, forests retreated from many regions, and broad grasslands expanded across the continent. Grazing mammals became swifter. Open country favored rapid bursts of speed, and the strengths of the cat body plan grew increasingly valuable. The balance between these two remarkable predator lineages slowly changed, guided less by sudden conflict than by an evolving world that rewarded different forms of adaptation. Earth rarely transforms in a single dramatic moment. More often, change arrives through countless ordinary seasons, each differing only slightly from the last until an entire continent has become something new. During the late Miocene, beginning around 10 million years ago, North America entered one of those gradual transitions. Temperatures trended cooler, rainfall patterns shifted, and many regions became progressively drier. No creature living through those generations would have witnessed a sudden collapse. Instead, every generation inherited a landscape just a little different from the one before it. The mixed woodlands that had long covered broad portions of the continent slowly retreated. Their place was increasingly taken by expanding grasslands that stretched across the interior. Trees became less continuous, leaving fewer sheltered corridors between open spaces. Wind traveled farther over the plains, and animals that once depended upon scattered woodland found those familiar habitats becoming smaller with each passing age. Predators and prey alike faced a landscape that rewarded different forms of movement and survival. Those environmental changes rippled through the herbivores. Teleoceras, with its heavy body and preference for wetter habitats, became less common as suitable environments diminished. Other browsing mammals also encountered increasing pressure as shrubs and woodland vegetation gave way to tougher grasses. At the same time, horses followed a different evolutionary path. Their teeth developed higher crowns capable of enduring the abrasive silica contained in grass, while their limbs became longer and more efficient for sustained running across open country. The prey community was changing into one better suited for distance, speed, and constant movement. For Epicyon, these developments created several challenges that reinforced one another. A predator of such impressive size required substantial nourishment. Maintaining a large body demanded frequent access to equally substantial prey, and that energetic balance became harder to sustain whenever large herbivores declined or became more difficult to capture. Every successful hunt carried greater importance because the cost of failure remained high. Its physical design also reflected a world that was gradually disappearing. Powerful limbs and immense jaws had evolved within landscapes containing a mixture of woodland and open ground, where bursts of force and coordinated attacks could be highly effective. Expanding grasslands reduced opportunities for that style of hunting. Faster prey crossed open terrain with fewer obstacles, leaving less opportunity for close approaches before a chase began. The environment itself gradually favored predators capable of rapid acceleration and flexible pursuit under increasingly open conditions. Specialization, once a tremendous advantage, became another source of vulnerability. Every distinctive feature of Epicyon, from its robust skull to its remarkable bite and substantial body, represented an investment in a particular ecological role. Such refinement allowed extraordinary success, while conditions remained favorable, yet it also limited the ability to adapt quickly when those conditions changed. Evolution often rewards specialists during stable times, but changing environments frequently favor species able to exploit a wider variety of resources. Members of the canidae, the branch that eventually produced modern wolves, foxes, and related dogs, followed a different path. Their generally smaller bodies, Broader diets and greater ecological flexibility allowed many of them to persist through shifting climates and changing prey communities. As the late Miocene continued, North America's predator guild slowly reorganized. The transformation unfolded across immense spans of time, shaped by climate, vegetation, and evolution acting together until the world that had once favored the great bone-crushing dogs no longer existed. The end of a great lineage did not arrive with fire across the horizon or a single moment preserved in stone. It unfolded over immense spans of time, measured by fossil layers that gradually became emptier. One branch disappeared, then another, until an entire family that had once flourished across North America existed only as scattered bones beneath the earth. There was no single boundary where every Borophagine vanished together. Their history closed through countless small endings that accumulated across millions of years. The earliest members of this remarkable group had already faded long before its largest representatives appeared. Small, fox-sized pioneers, such as Archaeocyon and Rhizocyon, belonged to the opening chapters of the dynasty. Their populations disappeared while newer forms diversified into larger bodies and more specialized lifestyles. By the time Epicyon reached its greatest success, those modest ancestors had been absent for ages, their role remembered only through the oldest fossil deposits that preserved the beginnings of the lineage. As the Miocene progressed, the family's remarkable diversity gradually narrowed. Around 12 million years ago, many Borophagine species had already completed their evolutionary stories. The fossil record preserves fewer species than before, and their geographic distribution became less extensive. Deposits that once yielded a broad assortment of bone-crushing dogs increasingly revealed only a handful of survivors. Evolution continued, yet the direction had shifted from expansion toward contraction. Among the last giants stood Epicyon, arriving comparatively late in the history of the subfamily. It represented the fullest expression of the bone-crushing design, combining tremendous size with extraordinary jaw strength. Fossils indicate that its presence extended until about 5.3 million years ago, near the boundary between the Miocene and the Pliocene. After that point, the evidence disappears across its known range. Nebraska no longer preserves it. Texas no longer preserves it. Florida no longer preserves it. California no longer preserves it. Within the resolution available to geology, the largest member of the dynasty had vanished from every region where it had once ruled. The story did not conclude immediately. Smaller relatives remained. Borophagus, closer in size to a modern wolf, continued carrying the defining characteristics of the bone-crushing dogs after the disappearance of Epicyon. It endured in a changing continent, surviving as the final representative of a lineage that had once filled North America with dozens of successful species. Its persistence suggested resilience, although the broader pattern had already become unmistakable. Around 2.5 million years ago, Borophagus also disappeared. With that extinction, the Borophaginae reached their final chapter after existing for roughly 31.5 million years. 66 known species had appeared across that extraordinary span, each contributing another branch before the entire subfamily came to an end. No descendants continued the lineage. The branch itself ended, leaving only its relatives in other parts of the canid family tree. Their disappearance also removed a distinctive ecological role. Since that time, North America has lacked a large carnivore consistently adapted to cracking the massive bones of megafauna and extracting the rich marrow hidden within. On the African continent, the spotted hyena still performs much of that function. North America has remained without a comparable specialist, for approximately 2.5 million years, preserving an absence that continues into the present. Evolution often advances by opening opportunities that could not exist before. When one successful lineage gradually withdraws from an ecosystem, another may expand into spaces that had remained inaccessible for millions of years. The disappearance of the great bone crushing dogs did not produce modern dogs through direct ancestry. Instead, it reshaped the ecological landscape in which another branch of the canid family could finally flourish. For roughly 30 million years, the Borophaginae occupied many of the dominant carnivore roles across North America. Their success influenced the evolutionary paths available to other canids. Alongside them lived members of the Canidae, the branch that would eventually give rise to every living wolf, fox, jackal, coyote, African wild dog, and domestic dog. Throughout much of the Borophagian era, these animals remained comparatively modest in size and occupied ecological roles that attracted less competition from their formidable relatives. One of the earliest representatives of this branch was Leptocyon, a small, lightly built canid that appeared while the bone-crushing dynasty still commanded the landscape. For countless generations, animals like Leptocyon survived as adaptable generalists. They fed on a broad assortment of foods, occupied varied habitats, and persisted without challenging the largest predators directly. Even around 12 million years ago, when Epicyon haydeni represented the height of Borophagine specialization, the canini displayed relatively limited diversification. Their evolutionary tree remained comparatively restrained, while the dominant branch continued to occupy many of the largest carnivore niches. As environmental change gradually reduced the fortunes of the Borophaginae, that long period of ecological restraint began to ease. Fewer dominant competitors meant more opportunities for adaptable canids to expand into habitats and lifestyles that had previously been difficult to occupy. Over millions of years, the Canidae diversified into larger forms, broadened their geographic distribution, and evolved into an increasingly varied collection of predators and omnivores. Their success did not emerge from a single dramatic event. It unfolded through gradual ecological release as established competitors disappeared one lineage after another. By approximately 2.5 million years ago, when Borophagus, the final surviving Borophagian, vanished from the fossil record, members of the genus Canis had already begun spreading across North America and Eurasia. From those expanding populations emerged the ancestors of gray wolves, followed by additional branches that adapted to an extraordinary range of environments. Land bridges connecting continents allowed these canids to extend far beyond the region where their distant family had first evolved. Much later, sometime between roughly 15,000 and 40,000 years ago, certain Eurasian gray wolf populations entered a new relationship unlike anything previously seen in natural history. Through a gradual process of domestication, wolves and humans formed an enduring partnership that eventually produced the domestic dog. This relationship spread across continents and cultures, becoming one of the most influential biological associations in human history. Modern dogs inherited none of the genes carried by Epicyon or any other Borophagine. Those two branches of the canid family had separated far too deeply in evolutionary time, and the Borophaginae left no living descendants. Even so, their history shaped the world inherited by the Caninae. The rise of the dog lineage became possible within ecosystems transformed by millions of years of competition, adaptation, and eventual ecological release after the great bone-crushing dynasty had faded from Earth. A fossil does not preserve movement, sound, or memory. It preserves structure. To a paleontologist, structure is a language shaped by millions of years of natural selection. Every ridge, socket, tooth, and curve reflects repeated mechanical demands placed upon a living animal. The skull of Epicyon hedeni is therefore more than evidence that the animal once existed. It is a record of the forces it encountered, the food it consumed, and the ecological role it occupied. Reading that record resembles careful detective work, where each clue gains meaning only when considered alongside the others. Its teeth provide some of the clearest evidence. Fossil specimens display pronounced wear across the broad, crushing surfaces of the rear teeth. These marks differ from the occasional chips expected when an ordinary carnivore accidentally bites into bone. Instead, the erosion follows consistent patterns produced by years of repetitive hard object feeding. Individual teeth become polished, flattened, and deeply worn in ways expected from an animal that routinely cracked large bones to reach the nutrient-rich marrow inside. Older individuals often show even greater wear, sometimes progressing to damaged or missing teeth, allowing researchers to estimate relative age at death while revealing the lifelong cost of such an extreme diet. Those wear patterns also invite comparison with living species. Modern spotted hyenas produce remarkably similar forms of dental abrasion because they rely upon many of the same feeding behaviors. Although the two groups are separated by millions of years and belong to different carnivore families, matching patterns of tooth wear support the conclusion that both evolved toward comparable solutions for processing extremely hard food. The skull itself reveals another layer of evidence. Epicyon possessed a comparatively shortened muzzle, a feature that changes the mechanics of biting. In simple physical terms, shortening the distance between the jaw joint and the rear teeth increases the force delivered during a bite. The geometry functions as a more efficient lever, concentrating power where crushing occurred. Engineering studies using finite element analysis have tested digital reconstructions of fossil skulls under simulated biting forces. These models indicate that the domed forehead distributed mechanical stress more effectively than the elongated skull shape typical of wolves, reducing concentrated strain during powerful bone crushing. Attention also turns to the jaw joint, where the lower jaw connects with the skull. In Epicyon, this region displays proportions capable of resisting substantial compressive forces. The arrangement differs measurably from that seen in living wolves and domestic dogs, reflecting repeated adaptation to unusually demanding feeding behavior. Evidence extends beyond skeletons themselves. Fossilized feces attributed to Borophagine dogs contain recognizable bone fragments together with mineral compositions rich in calcium, matching expectations for animals that consumed large quantities of skeletal material. Similar digestive traces occur in modern spotted hyenas, whose digestive systems dissolve bone with exceptional efficiency. Even so, paleontology recognizes clear limits. Fossils cannot directly reveal coat color, vocalizations, exact social organization, breeding behavior, or the personality of any individual animal. Those aspects remain informed hypotheses based upon ecological comparisons with living relatives rather than preserved facts. The distinction between evidence and inference remains central to scientific practice. Knowledge of Epicyon accumulated gradually. Joseph Leidy described the earliest specimens in 1858. More than a century later, the comprehensive work of Xiaoming Wang, Richard Tedford, and Beryl Taylor, drawing extensively from the Child's Frick collection at the American Museum of Natural History, clarified the evolutionary relationships of all 66 recognized Borophagine species. Each newly discovered fossil added another sentence to a story written in stone across nearly 2 centuries of research. Every ecosystem depends upon countless exchanges that often pass unnoticed. Energy moves from plants into herbivores, then into predators, while minerals travel through soil, water, living tissue, and decay before beginning the cycle again. The identity of a species matters because of the work it performs within that network. When a species disappears, another organism may inherit part of its role. Sometimes, no replacement arrives, leaving an ecological function absent long after the animal itself has vanished. The great bone-crushing dogs occupied one such role. Large mammal carcasses contain tremendous stores of calcium, phosphorus, and other minerals locked inside dense skeletons. Flesh disappears comparatively quickly through feeding and decomposition, yet bone resists those same processes. Without animals capable of systematically breaking heavy skeletal material into smaller pieces, those nutrients remain trapped for extended periods, while weather, fungi, bacteria, and chemical reactions gradually return them to the environment. Depending upon local conditions, complete breakdown may require many years. Bone crushers transform that timetable. By shattering large bones and consuming the nutrient-rich marrow inside, they reduce massive skeletal structures into fragments that digestive systems can process. Minerals re-enter the landscape through feces within days after the death of a large animal, rather than remaining locked inside an intact skeleton for prolonged periods. The process accelerates nutrient cycling, making essential elements available to plants and countless smaller organisms much sooner. Modern Eastern Africa offers a living example. Spotted hyenas consume approximately 1/3 of the biomass from large animal carcasses across portions of the Serengeti ecosystem. Their contribution exceeds that of lions, African wild dogs, or vultures when measured by total carcass utilization. They function as principal recyclers of calcium and phosphorus, helping return those materials to the soil with remarkable efficiency. Ecological studies indicate that reducing hyena populations alters nutrient movement, influencing soil chemistry, and, over longer intervals, the biological communities that depend upon those nutrients. For more than 31 million years, Borophagine dogs likely performed an equivalent service across much of North America. Their specialized teeth, reinforced skulls, and powerful jaws allowed them to process bones beyond the capability of ordinary canids. When Borophagus, the final representative of that lineage, disappeared approximately 2.5 million years ago, no comparable bone-crushing carnivore remained. Wolves can break smaller bones and consume portions of larger skeletons, yet they lack the anatomical specialization needed to process heavy skeletal material with the same consistency. The difference appears not only in living ecosystems but also within the fossil record itself. Younger deposits formed after the disappearance of the bone-crushing dogs preserve a greater proportion of large bones remaining comparatively intact, while extensive crushing marks become less common. Paleontologists recognize these changes as evidence that an important ecological process had diminished. The fossils record more than extinct animals. They also preserve the absence of an ecological worker that once altered nearly every large carcass scattered across the landscape. The disappearance of that function reminds us that extinction extends beyond the loss of a species. It can alter the pace at which nutrients circulate, reshape interactions among scavengers, and leave measurable traces in both living environments and ancient rocks. Long after the final Borophagine vanished, the continent continued adapting to an ecological role that remained unfilled. Before the first bone is cracked, the pattern already exists. Evolutionary biologists use the term convergent evolution to describe one of nature's most striking regularities. When unrelated groups encounter the same ecological challenge over immense spans of time, they often arrive at remarkably similar anatomical solutions. Those similarities do not arise from close ancestry. They emerge because natural selection repeatedly favors designs that solve the same physical problem. The history of bone crushing carnivores offers one of the clearest examples. Epicyon belonged to the dog family and lived across Miocene, North America. The modern spotted hyena belongs to an entirely different branch of carnivorous mammals, sharing a closer relationship with mongooses and civets than with dogs. Another extinct specialist, Pachycrocuta brevirostris, inhabited portions of Eurasia and Africa during the Pleistocene and exceeded even modern spotted hyenas in size. These animals occupied different continents, lived during different ages, and descended from separate evolutionary histories. Despite those differences, their skulls reveal an extraordinary resemblance. Each evolved a shortened, deep muzzle capable of generating tremendous bite forces. Each developed enlarged carnassial teeth and reinforced premolars suited to repeated impacts against dense bone. Thickened skulls distributed powerful stresses, while digestive systems tolerated unusually large quantities of calcium-rich skeletal material. Their ecological role also converged. All became specialists, capable of extracting nutrients that many other carnivores left behind. The explanation extends beyond biology into physics. Breaking the shaft of a large limb bone requires concentrated mechanical force delivered without damaging the predator itself. A shorter distance between the jaw joint and the crushing teeth improves leverage. Robust teeth resist repeated compressive loading. Reinforced skull architecture spreads stress away from vulnerable regions. Digestive chemistry completes the process by dissolving fragments rich in minerals. These requirements remain constant regardless of ancestry. Whether evolution begins with a canid or a feliform lineage, the mechanical demands remain essentially the same. That consistency explains why convergence appears repeatedly throughout Earth's history. Similar ecological opportunities repeatedly favor similar anatomical solutions because the underlying physical constraints allow only a limited range of effective designs. Evolution explores variation continuously, yet certain destinations appear again and again whenever comparable selective pressures persist long enough. The story also reflects competition. During the later history of Epicyon, increasingly capable members of the cat family expanded across North America. Larger cats gained advantages when confronting formidable canid rivals, while larger borophagines improved their chances against expanding feline competitors. Natural selection rewarded increasing size and specialization within both groups, producing an evolutionary contest that intensified across successive generations. Such escalation generated impressive adaptations, yet it also reduced flexibility when climates, habitats, and prey communities changed. Viewed through this broader perspective, Epicyon represents more than a remarkable extinct predator. It illustrates one of evolutionary biology's most dependable patterns. Independent lineages repeatedly discover comparable solutions because the laws governing force, material strength, and survival remain constant. Across different continents and millions of years, life often reaches familiar answers when confronted with the same enduring challenge. Few mammal families display such extraordinary variety as the canids. Today, They include approximately 37 living species, ranging from the tiny fennec fox, weighing only a few pounds, to the gray wolf, whose largest individuals may exceed 175 pounds. Together, they occupy deserts, forests, mountains, grasslands, and Arctic tundra across every continent except Antarctica. Their living diversity represents only part of the family's story. Hidden within the fossil record are entire branches that flourished for millions of years before disappearing completely, including Epicyon haydni and the 65 other known members of the Borophaginae. At first glance, the distance between a domestic dog and Epicyon seems almost impossible to bridge. Their shared ancestry lies far back within the earliest history of the canid family, among primitive ancestors that lived tens of millions of years before either branch acquired its defining characteristics. In evolutionary terms, they resemble distant cousins separated by an immense span of time. Their relationship is genuine, yet countless generations of adaptation transformed each lineage along dramatically different paths. Even so, the family resemblance never disappears entirely. Place the skull of a modern dog beside that of Epicyon, and familiar patterns emerge beneath the obvious differences in scale. The same arrangement of facial bones supports the muzzle. Similar teeth occupy corresponding positions despite their specialized shapes. The lower jaw hinges against the skull through the same basic mechanical design, and both animals walked upon their toes rather than placing the entire foot upon the ground. Evolution reshaped proportions repeatedly, yet it continued building upon a common architectural plan inherited from distant ancestors. The path leading toward domestic dogs followed the canidae, a branch that spent much of its early history living alongside far larger Borophagian relatives. While the great bone-crushing dogs occupied dominant carnivore roles across much of North America, smaller canines survived through flexibility. They accepted broader diets, occupied varied habitats, and adapted readily to changing opportunities. Those qualities attracted little attention, while the giant specialists flourished, although they proved increasingly valuable as environments continued changing through time. Eventually, members of the genus Canis expanded beyond North America into Eurasia. Between approximately 15,000 and 40,000 years ago, some Eurasian gray wolf populations entered a gradual process of domestication alongside human communities. Across many generations, that relationship produced the domestic dog. Every companion resting beside a fireplace, running through a park, or sleeping at the foot of a bed traces its ancestry through those adaptable wolves rather than through the formidable Borophagian branch that had once dominated an entire continent. The contrast reveals one of evolution's most remarkable patterns. The largest and most specialized canid known, capable of crushing immense bones with extraordinary efficiency, vanished without leaving living descendants. A comparatively modest lineage, occupying less prominent ecological roles for millions of years, endured through repeated environmental change and eventually spread alongside humanity across nearly the entire globe. This history does not suggest that evolution favors strength above all else, nor that small size alone guarantees success. Natural selection continually rewards characteristics that match present conditions. As climates, landscapes, and ecological relationships shift, qualities that once seemed secondary may become decisive. The enduring legacy of the canid family rests not in the greatest bite force ever achieved, but in the remarkable capacity of one adaptable branch to persist, while so many extraordinary relatives became chapters preserved only in stone. Power often appears permanent while it lasts. Looking across the history of life, it is easy to assume that the largest predator, the strongest bite, or the most refined anatomy represents the safest place evolution can reach. The fossil record offers a different lesson. Again and again, organisms that seemed perfectly matched to their world disappeared when that world gradually changed around them. Among the great predators of North America, Epicyon stands as one of the clearest examples of this enduring pattern. Its skull embodied millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Every proportion served a purpose. The shortened muzzle increased mechanical advantage, reinforced bone dispersed crushing forces. Teeth specialized for breaking dense skeletons, unlocked food unavailable to most other carnivores. Taken together, these features created one of the most efficient bone processing systems ever produced within the dog family. Such precision represented an extraordinary achievement, shaped across countless generations by natural selection. Precision, however, carries its own cost. Anatomical structures cannot be optimized equally for every challenge. A jaw designed to deliver immense crushing force sacrifices speed and versatility. Heavy muscles supporting powerful bites require a skull built for different mechanical demands than one intended for rapid pursuit across open country. A body suited to overpowering large prey and processing massive bones does not automatically excel at covering long distances with maximum efficiency. Each improvement narrows the range of circumstances in which that design performs best. Evolution gains excellence in one direction while surrendering possibilities in others. Modern North America provides an illuminating contrast through the coyote. Compared with the great Borophagian dogs, the coyote appears modest in nearly every physical measure. It feeds upon rodents, rabbits, insects, fruit, carrion, deer, and even food discarded by people. It occupies deserts, forests, grasslands, farmland, suburbs, and expanding cities with remarkable success. Following European settlement of North America, its distribution expanded dramatically as ecological conditions shifted and larger competitors declined. Its greatest strength lies not in overwhelming power, but in extraordinary flexibility. This contrast reflects one of the strongest patterns recognized in extinction biology. Hypercarnivores, animals obtaining most of their nourishment from meat, disappear more frequently than omnivores or moderately carnivorous species during periods of environmental change. Dependence upon large prey creates vulnerability. Whenever prey populations fluctuate, habitats transform, or competing predators alter ecological relationships. Researchers have documented this tendency repeatedly across unrelated mammal groups and multiple extinction intervals, revealing that it extends far beyond the history of any single lineage. Viewed through that broader perspective, Epicyon did not fail because its adaptations were poorly designed. They succeeded exceptionally well within the conditions that produced them. The difficulty emerged when climates shifted, landscapes opened, prey communities changed, and new competitors altered the balance of the ecosystem. Characteristics that had once guaranteed success gradually became less advantageous as the surrounding world followed a different course. The story therefore reaches beyond paleontology into a wider observation about life itself. Dominance belongs to a particular moment, shaped by the circumstances of that moment. Adaptability reaches across many moments instead. Evolution preserves neither strength nor perfection for their own sake. It continually favors whatever traits allow survival under present conditions, even when those traits seem unremarkable beside the magnificent specialists that once ruled an earlier age. An extinction rarely marks the complete end of a story. Long after a species disappears, traces of its influence may remain woven through living ecosystems in ways that are difficult to notice at first. Evolutionary biologists, sometimes describe one such phenomenon as the ghost of predation past. The phrase refers to prey species that continue displaying defensive behaviors shaped by predators that vanished thousands or even millions of years earlier. Evolution does not erase successful adaptations the moment a danger disappears. Those inherited responses can endure across immense spans of time. The North American pronghorn offers one of the clearest examples. It is capable of reaching speeds approaching 55 miles per hour and can maintain remarkable velocity across open country. No living predator in North America consistently requires such performance. Gray wolves can achieve impressive bursts of speed, yet they cannot sustain pursuit at the same pace demanded by the pronghorn's remarkable endurance. The explanation lies in a deeper history. During the Pleistocene and, farther back, the Miocene, swift pursuit predators imposed powerful selective pressure upon fast-running herbivores. The predators disappeared, while the speed remained. The pronghorn still carries an adaptation shaped for enemies that no longer exist. Behavior preserves similar echoes. Modern deer, elk, and other grazing mammals do not merely respond to predators standing before them. Their patterns of movement across open grasslands, their preference for certain escape routes, and their use of cover reflect evolutionary pressures accumulated across countless generations. Those instincts developed in landscapes inhabited by many formidable carnivores, including the great Borophagine dogs. Although the exact behaviors of those extinct predators cannot be observed directly, the responses they encouraged persist within descendants of prey populations that survived them. The influence extends beyond behavior into the ground itself. For more than 31 million years, Borophagian carnivores participated in returning calcium, phosphorus, and other essential minerals from large skeletons back into the environment. Every shattered bone and every meal contributed to a continuing cycle of nutrient redistribution. Across geological time, those repeated processes became one small part of the complex natural systems that shaped the fertile grassland soils of central North America. Countless organisms participated in that transformation, yet the great bone-crushing dogs formed an important link within the broader chain. Modern wolves illustrate another form of ecological inheritance. They did not descend from Epicyon, nor do they preserve its specialized anatomy. Their lineage followed an entirely different evolutionary path. Even so, wolves now occupy a leading canid role across many North American ecosystems, functioning within predator communities whose broader structure developed over millions of years, while Borophagian dogs remained dominant. The position existed long before the modern wolf arrived to occupy it. These enduring influences reveal that extinction is more complex than disappearance alone. Behavioral tendencies, ecological relationships, nutrient cycles, and even the organization of predator communities may continue carrying impressions left by species that vanished long ago. The animal itself no longer walks the landscape, yet its presence survives indirectly through living organisms and environments shaped by its former existence. In that sense, the history of Epicyon remains written not only in fossil bones, but also within the continuing rhythms of the continent that once supported it. Time becomes difficult to imagine once it stretches beyond ordinary experience. A century already exceeds the span of most human lives. 1,000 years carries civilizations from birth to memory. Millions of years belong to an entirely different scale, where mountains change shape, rivers choose new paths, and familiar landscapes become almost unrecognizable. Within that immense passage of time, the history of Epicyon takes on a meaning that extends far beyond a single predator. The species Epicyon haydeni endured for roughly 7 million years. The genus to which it belonged persisted for approximately 15 million years. Looking farther back still, the Borophaginae occupied North America for about 31.5 million years. Those figures are difficult to absorb until they are compared with something familiar. Recorded human history, from the earliest written records to the present day, covers only about 5,000 years. Against the lifespan of Epicyon Haydni, every kingdom, empire, discovery, and written story occupies only a tiny interval. The comparison grows even more striking when placed beside humanity itself. The genus Homo has existed for approximately 2.4 million years. Epicyon haydni, considered as a single species, persisted for well over twice that span. Modern humans appeared only a few 100,000 years ago, representing a comparatively recent chapter within Earth's history. Measured against the lifetime of this extinct predator, our own species has occupied only a brief portion of the geological record. Such numbers gently challenge an assumption many people carry without noticing. The landscapes surrounding us often appear permanent. Prairies seem destined to remain prairies. Forests appear timeless, and familiar animals give the impression that they have always belonged where we find them today. The fossil record tells another story. Across millions of years, the plains of Nebraska, the grasslands of Texas, and the woodlands of Florida hosted communities unlike those living there now. Entire groups of mammals flourished, diversified, and disappeared, while the continent itself continued changing through shifting climates and evolving ecosystems. Earth, therefore, resembles an unfolding current more than a fixed stage. Every generation experiences only a single moment within that movement. From our perspective, the present appears enduring because human lives occupy such a narrow slice of geological time. Rocks, fossils, and sediments preserve a broader view, revealing that even the most familiar environments eventually transform into something entirely different. When the final known Epicyon haydni vanished approximately 5.1 million years ago, the ancestors of modern humans remained small upright primates living in Africa. Stone tool traditions had scarcely begun to emerge, and the long journey toward civilization lay unimaginably far ahead. The great bone-crushing dog had already disappeared long before humanity developed agriculture, writing, cities, or historical memory. Despite that immense separation, its existence is no longer hidden. Fossils, preserved within ancient sediments, allowed paleontologists to reconstruct its anatomy, estimate its size, understand its diet, and place it within the remarkable history of the dog family. Across millions of years, the bones endured patiently beneath changing landscapes until another species, itself only a recent arrival, learned how to read the stories written within stone. Every fossil begins as an ordinary object resting within stone. A weathered tooth emerging from a hillside or a fragment of jaw preserved beneath layers of sediment carries no explanation with it. Meaning appears only when someone notices it, asks careful questions, compares it with countless other discoveries, and patiently assembles evidence into a coherent picture. The history of Epicyon exists today because generations of researchers accepted that challenge. During the 1850s, Ferdinand Hayden traveled across portions of the Great Plains, collecting fossils from rock formations that had received little scientific attention. The specimens eventually reached Joseph Leidy in Philadelphia, whose careful descriptions established an important foundation for North American vertebrate paleontology. In 1858, Leidy gave a scientific name to a remarkable animal whose full story remained far beyond the knowledge available at the time. That first description, represented the beginning of an investigation rather than its conclusion. As decades passed, museum collections expanded through new excavations across the continent. Each additional skull, tooth, limb, bone, and vertebra contributed another piece to an increasingly detailed portrait. Individual discoveries rarely transformed understanding on their own. Progress emerged through accumulation, with every generation refining earlier interpretations instead of replacing them entirely. Scientific knowledge advanced through steady revision, guided by evidence preserved in stone. New methods gradually revealed information unavailable to earlier researchers. Mechanical modeling allowed investigators to estimate how fossil skulls distributed force during feeding. Chemical studies of tooth enamel preserved clues about diet and habitat. Fossilized droppings offered rare glimpses into digestion and food processing. High resolution imaging exposed internal structures without damaging precious specimens. Each technique illuminated a different aspect of an animal that no living observer had ever witnessed. Near the close of the 20th century, Xiaoming Wang, Richard Tedford, and Beryl Taylor produced a comprehensive evolutionary analysis of the Borophagine dogs. Integrating decades of discoveries into a unified framework, their work clarified relationships among all known species within the group and provided a lasting reference for future research. Even today, that framework continues evolving as newly discovered fossils add further detail to the family tree. Interest in Epicyon eventually reached audiences beyond scientific journals. In 2024, its extraordinary size received widespread public attention after formal recognition as the largest known dog species. For many people, the name appeared for the first time, linking modern curiosity with research stretching back more than a century and a half. This progression illustrates a remarkable feature of science itself. It reaches into times no memory can preserve and no eyewitness could ever describe. The Miocene world vanished millions of years before human beings appeared. No tradition, legend, or written record could have carried knowledge of its inhabitants across that immense interval. Fossils alone preserved the necessary evidence. From scattered mineralized bones, scientists estimated body size, reconstructed skull mechanics, inferred feeding behavior, identified evolutionary relationships, and determined the approximate period during which this remarkable predator lived. None of those conclusions emerged from imagination. Each rested upon physical traces, patiently examined, compared, questioned, and tested. In that continuing effort lies one of humanity's most distinctive abilities, the capacity to recover fragments of worlds, long vanished, and restore them to understanding through evidence alone. Among the many questions preserved within the fossil record, some appear surprisingly simple. One of the most enduring discussions surrounding Epicyon asks whether two named species truly represent separate evolutionary lineages, or whether they instead reflect the natural differences between males and females of a single species. The available fossils offer persuasive evidence on both sides, leaving paleontologists with a mystery that remains unresolved. The debate centers upon Epicyon haydeni and Epicyon savis. Fossils assigned to Epicyon haydeni generally represent much larger animals than those attributed to Epicyon savis. The estimated difference extends well beyond ordinary individual variation, with the larger form exceeding the smaller by a substantial margin in overall body size and estimated weight. Such a gap often supports recognition of distinct species. Nature, however, provides many examples where males and females differ so dramatically that they could almost be mistaken for separate animals. Southern elephant seals illustrate this possibility on an extraordinary scale. Mature males outweigh females by several times, while retaining the ability to reproduce within the same species. Gorillas also display striking sexual dimorphism, with adult males greatly exceeding females in body mass and skeletal robustness. Modern members of the dog family likewise tend to show males that are somewhat larger than females, although the difference is generally far less dramatic. These living comparisons encourage researchers to ask whether the apparent separation between Epicyon haydeni and Epicyon savis could represent an unusually pronounced example of the same biological pattern. Evidence supporting separate species remains substantial. Fossils assigned to both forms occur within many of the same geological formations and during overlapping intervals of time. Researchers have also identified differences in the proportions of important teeth, including the carnassials and premolars, that extend beyond overall size alone. These distinctions suggest differences in anatomy that may reflect separate evolutionary histories instead of differences between the sexes of one population. For these reasons, the current scientific consensus continues recognizing Epicyon haydeni and Epicyon savis as distinct species. Supporters of the alternative interpretation point to another observation. The geographic distributions of both forms overlap extensively, and they frequently appear within the same regions where one might naturally expect males and females of a single species to occur together. Some investigators also argue that certain anatomical differences could reasonably fall within the range expected between the sexes of a highly dimorphic carnivore. If that interpretation ultimately proved correct, fossils identified for many years as Epicyon savis would instead represent females belonging to the larger Epicyon haydeni population. Resolving such questions is particularly difficult because paleontology studies incomplete evidence. Fossils rarely preserve soft tissues, behavior, coloration, reproductive biology, or family relationships. Scientists must infer those missing details from bones, teeth, and the surrounding rocks, carefully comparing every specimen while remaining open to revision when new discoveries emerge. This continuing discussion illustrates one of the discipline's greatest strengths. Scientific conclusions are built from evidence, yet they remain open to refinement whenever additional fossils or improved analytical methods reveal information previously hidden. Some mysteries endure for decades, inviting each new generation of researchers to examine familiar bones with fresh perspectives and more powerful tools. A fossil has a different presence when it stands before you instead of resting on the page of a book. Drawings, measurements, and scientific descriptions prepare the mind, yet they cannot fully recreate the experience of sharing a room with the remains of an animal that disappeared millions of years ago. The distance between illustration and reality becomes surprisingly small, measured only by a few careful steps across a museum floor. One place where that experience becomes possible is the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. Its collections contain tens of millions of specimens and artifacts gathered over many generations of research. Within the museum's Age of Mammals Hall, visitors encounter a mounted skeleton of Epicyon haydeni, reconstructed from fossil evidence into the posture scientists believe it once carried across Miocene North America. From across the gallery, the skeleton resembles a large dog only for an instant. As the distance closes, familiar expectations begin to fade. The proportions seem unusual. The front of the body appears heavier than expected. The chest is broad, the neck carries substantial muscle attachments, and the skull dominates the entire silhouette in a way unlike modern domestic dogs or even the largest living wolves. The skull immediately captures attention. Modern wolves possess an elongated muzzle that narrows toward the nose. Epicyon presents a different design. Its face is comparatively shorter, while the lower jaw is deep and remarkably robust. The top of the skull rises into a rounded profile that provided generous attachment areas for powerful jaw muscles. The jaw joint sits well toward the rear, increasing mechanical advantage during biting and concentrating tremendous force through the crushing teeth. Those teeth tell their own story. Instead of slender cutting structures adapted primarily for slicing flesh, the enlarged premolars form broad, durable surfaces capable of withstanding repeated contact with bone. On older individuals, many of these teeth display extensive wear. The polished surfaces are not scars left by fossilization. They accumulated during the animal's lifetime through countless feeding events. Every worn edge represents another meal, processed with extraordinary force. The rest of the skeleton reinforces that impression. Thick limb bones supported exceptional weight while preserving the mobility expected of an active predator. The rib cage appears expansive, suggesting a powerful body built for strength instead of graceful speed alone. Standing beside the mount gives scale that no illustration can communicate. The skeleton occupies real space, inviting comparison with the height and proportions of the people walking through the gallery. Many visitors spend only a few moments studying the display before moving onward. Those who pause longer often notice smaller details: the subtle curve of a tooth, the texture preserved on fossil bone, or the careful craftsmanship required to reconstruct an extinct animal from scattered remains. The mount becomes more than an exhibit, it becomes evidence. That is perhaps the museum's greatest gift. The skeleton is neither legend nor artistic invention. It is the preserved framework of an animal that genuinely lived, hunted, fed, and disappeared long before human beings appeared. Millions of years separate its world from ours, yet within a museum gallery, those immense spans of time narrow into a single shared moment of observation. The story of the Borophagines did not unfold in a single leap. It stretched across roughly 31.5 million years, during which one successful lineage repeatedly adapted to changing climates, shifting habitats, and new competitors. Fossils preserve that long progression as a series of connected lives, each species carrying forward features inherited from those that came before, while adding subtle changes of its own. Near the beginning of that history stands Archaeocyon, whose name translates as ancient dog. Living during the Oligocene epoch, it inhabited parts of western North America, including regions represented today by the White River Formation of Nebraska and South Dakota. It was a modest animal, about the size of a fox, feeding opportunistically on whatever resources the landscape offered. Small vertebrates, insects, fruit, and carrion likely all contributed to its diet. Although its jaws lacked the tremendous crushing strength that later Borophagines became famous for, the basic framework of that future specialization was already beginning to appear. As the lineage expanded, it diversified into several branches that explored different ecological roles. Members of the group known as Phlocyonini remained relatively small and adaptable, filling niches occupied by flexible omnivores. The Cynarctina followed another path, growing into medium-sized canids that balanced meat with a varied diet. These branches reveal that early Borophagines were not confined to a single way of life. Their shared anatomy proved capable of supporting many different feeding strategies across changing environments. Another chapter emerged as certain descendants became increasingly specialized hunters. Genera, such as Tomarctus, displayed shorter skulls and sturdier premolars than their predecessors, reflecting greater emphasis on processing meat and resisting heavier bite forces. Those trends continued through Ailurodon, whose fossils appear across broad areas of North America. Its skull grew deeper, its jaws stronger, and its teeth increasingly suited to cracking and consuming parts of carcasses that many other predators left behind. Each evolutionary step built upon earlier adaptations instead of replacing them outright. The final portion of the dynasty included its most imposing members. Borophagus represented one of the last successful borophagian genera, combining formidable jaws with fully developed bone-crushing capabilities. It survived until roughly 2.5 million years ago, persisting after several of its relatives had disappeared. Alongside this later history stands Epicyon, remembered as the largest canid known from the fossil record. Its immense size and powerful skull marked the culmination of evolutionary trends that had accumulated over millions of generations. Viewed together, the Borophagine record reveals a lineage that continually responded to ecological opportunity. Small generalists gave rise to larger omnivores, specialized hunters, and eventually powerful predators capable of processing entire carcasses with remarkable efficiency. Their history illustrates how evolution can reshape one successful body plan into many distinct forms while preserving a recognizable family identity. Today, every borophagine species is extinct. Their branch of the dog family ended completely, yet their fossils remain scattered through rock formations across North America. Those preserved bones document a remarkable evolutionary journey, one measured not merely by the passage of time, but by the steady accumulation of adaptation across an entire dynasty. Across the Texas Panhandle lies a landscape that appears familiar today, yet the rocks beneath its surface preserve the remains of a very different community. Around 7 million years ago, during the late Miocene, this region supported one of the richest assemblages of large mammals known from North America. Fossils recovered from the locality called Coffee Ranch reveal an ecosystem where grazers, browsers, omnivores, and formidable predators shared the same broad plains, leaving behind an unusually complete record of their world. By this point in Earth's history, mountain ranges along the western edge of the continent had altered regional weather patterns for millions of years. Less moisture reached the interior, encouraging the continued spread of grasslands across much of central North America. Woodlands still bordered streams and seasonal waterways, yet open country dominated the horizon. Large herds could travel freely across these expansive habitats, while predators adapted to landscapes where movement was visible from great distances. Among the taller herbivores was Apicamelus, an extraordinary camel with an elongated neck that allowed it to browse leaves beyond the reach of many neighboring animals. Nearby, herds of Neohipparion, one of the three-toed horses of the late Miocene, grazed across the grasslands with constant attention to their surroundings. Smaller hoofed mammals, including the pronghorn relative Casorix, occupied the edges between open fields and scattered trees. Along wetter channels lived Teleoceras, a rhinoceros with a broad body and comparatively short legs, spending much of its time close to dependable water. Woodland patches also sheltered Prosthenops, an extinct peccary whose flexible diet allowed it to exploit a wide variety of foods. The predators reflected that same diversity. Barbarophilus, often called a false saber-toothed carnivore, hunted with elongated upper canine teeth suited to powerful ambush attacks. Another formidable hunter, Amphimacheirotus coloradensis, belonged to the true saber-toothed cats and represented one of the dominant feline predators of its age. The giant bear Agriotherium also inhabited this environment, large enough to challenge other carnivores for access to carcasses. Among the bone-crushing dogs was Borophagus, smaller than its largest relatives, yet highly specialized for consuming carcasses thoroughly. Within this community, Epicyon occupied an exceptional place. Its immense skull, powerful jaws, and durable teeth allowed it to exploit food resources unavailable to many competitors. Fresh meat, connective tissue, and the nutritious marrow sealed within heavy limb bones all formed part of its feeding opportunities. Fossil evidence cannot preserve every encounter between these animals, yet their shared presence at Coffee Ranch suggests repeated interactions shaped by competition, opportunity, and the constant search for food. Coffee Ranch demonstrates that paleontology is capable of reconstructing more than isolated species. A single fossil locality can reveal an entire ecological network connecting plants, herbivores, scavengers, and predators within one evolving landscape. Although every animal represented there eventually disappeared, their remains continue to preserve a detailed record of life during the closing chapters of the Miocene. Each newly examined specimen adds another small piece to that remarkable picture, allowing researchers to understand how one North American ecosystem functioned millions of years before human observers ever stood upon those same plains. Scientific knowledge sometimes advances through discoveries, and sometimes through enduring uncertainty. Among researchers who specialize in the fossil history of Epicyon, one question continues to invite careful examination. The fossils traditionally assigned to Epicyon haydni and Epicyon savis are clearly similar, yet they differ enough in size and certain anatomical features to raise an intriguing possibility. They may represent two distinct species, or they may instead preserve the natural differences between males and females of a single species. The contrast begins with overall proportions. Fossils attributed to Epicyon haydni consistently belong to much larger animals than those assigned to Epicyon savis. The larger form stood about 3 feet at the shoulder and may have approached a body weight of roughly 375 pounds. The smaller form measured closer to 1 3/4 feet at the shoulder and weighed approximately 147 pounds. Such differences are substantial, and in many fossil mammals, they would strongly support recognizing separate species. Living mammals, however, demonstrate that dramatic size differences do not always mark separate evolutionary lineages. Southern elephant seals provide one of the most striking examples. Mature males outweigh females by several times while belonging to the same species. Gorillas also display pronounced sexual dimorphism, with adult males substantially larger and more heavily built than females. Modern members of the dog family generally show more modest differences between the sexes, although males are commonly somewhat larger than females. These living comparisons encourage paleontologists to consider whether Epicyon might also have exhibited unusually strong sexual dimorphism. If so, fossils identified as Epicyon haydni could represent predominantly males, while specimens assigned to Epicyon savis might belong primarily to females. The overlap in their geographic distribution adds interest to this idea because both forms are frequently recovered from similar regions and comparable intervals of the late Miocene. The argument for maintaining two species remains persuasive. Researchers have documented anatomical differences extending beyond overall size. Certain premolars and carnassial teeth differ in proportion as well as scale, suggesting distinctions that may reflect separate evolutionary histories instead of differences between the sexes. Fossils attributed to both forms also occur repeatedly within the same formations, supporting the interpretation that two closely related canids occupied similar environments at the same time. For these reasons, the prevailing scientific classification continues to recognize Epicyon haydeni and Epicyon savis as separate species. Even so, the alternative interpretation has not disappeared from scientific discussion. The available fossil record remains incomplete, and every newly described specimen has the potential to refine earlier conclusions. Paleontology rarely offers the opportunity to observe living populations, leaving researchers to reconstruct biology from preserved bones, teeth, and the rocks that surround them. Whether future evidence ultimately supports one species or two, the broader picture remains unchanged. These were immense Borophagine canids that flourished across North America during the Miocene. Their fossils preserve an evolutionary story of exceptional scale, while the continuing discussion surrounding their identity reminds us that science is not a collection of permanent answers. It is an ongoing process of comparing evidence, testing ideas, and remaining willing to revise conclusions whenever the rocks reveal something new. The disappearance of a great predator is rarely an isolated event. Every hunter exists within a community shaped by the animals it pursues, the competitors that share its range, and the landscapes that sustain them all. The history of Epicyon becomes clearer when viewed alongside the many herbivores and fellow carnivores that occupied the same late Miocene ecosystems. Their stories are intertwined because they depended upon the same environmental conditions, and many declined as those conditions gradually changed. Among the largest browsing mammals was Apicamelus, a long-necked camel unlike any living species. Camels had originated in North America and diversified there for tens of millions of years before some lineages eventually spread into Asia and South America. Apicamelus belonged to a branch adapted to feeding from trees and shrubs scattered across mixed woodland and grassland habitats. As expanding grasslands and shifting climates reduced those environments, this remarkable browser disappeared. The camel family itself survived, although its descendants ultimately flourished far from the continent where the group first evolved. Another familiar presence of the Miocene was Teleoceras, a rhinoceros with a broad body and relatively short limbs that spent much of its life near rivers, floodplains, and wetlands. Fossils of this animal occur in remarkable abundance across North America, revealing that it was once among the continent's most successful large herbivores. As wetter habitats became less extensive in many regions, populations declined, and the North American rhinoceros lineage eventually vanished. Modern rhinoceroses now survive only in Africa and Asia, leaving no native representatives in the land where Teleoceras once thrived. The grasslands also supported numerous three-toed horses, including members of the genus Neohipparion. These agile grazers occupied open country for millions of years before later horse lineages became more widespread. Their disappearance was part of an extended evolutionary transition rather than a single sudden event. Eventually, horses with a single dominant hoof became increasingly successful. Even those later horses disappeared from North America near the close of the Ice Age, only returning thousands of years later through human introduction. Other distinctive herbivores vanished without leaving close modern counterparts. Among them was Synthetoceras, a member of an unusual North American family whose elaborate horns have fascinated paleontologists since their discovery. No living mammal combines its distinctive appearance with its evolutionary heritage, reminding us that many successful branches of the tree of life ended completely. These disappearances illustrate a recurring pattern within North American natural history. The continent has experienced repeated reorganizations of its large mammal communities as climates shifted, vegetation changed, and ecological opportunities emerged for new groups while fading for others. One collection of dominant species gradually yielded to another, producing landscapes that would have appeared increasingly unfamiliar across successive spans of geological time. Within that broader transformation, Epicyon occupied the role of a highly specialized predator whose success depended upon the abundance of large mammals around it. As those communities changed, the ecological setting that had supported such an immense bone-crushing canid also disappeared. The extinction of Epicyon therefore reflects more than the loss of a single remarkable predator. It represents the closing chapter of an entire ecological community whose members, from towering browsers to powerful carnivores, belong to a North America that no longer exists. The story of the dog family did not end when Epicyon disappeared into the fossil record. Instead, it transformed into something far more expansive. The lineage that had originated in North America roughly 40 million years ago was about to inherit the world, spreading across continents and adapting to every landscape the planet offered. This achievement would unfold not through the great bone-crushing specialists, but through the overlooked branch that had survived in their shadow for millions of years. The first major crossing came when geography itself shifted. Around 3 million years ago, the Isthmus of Panama rose from the sea, creating a permanent land bridge between two continents that had been separated for tens of millions of years. This connection triggered what scientists call the Great American Biotic Interchange, a mass movement of species in both directions. Canidae ancestors moved southward into South America, entering a continent that had never hosted native carnivores of comparable size. Over subsequent millions of years, they diversified into forms found nowhere else on Earth. The maned wolf, standing on impossibly long legs to hunt rodents in the grasslands, descended from those North American migrants. The bush dog, adapted to rainforest hunting, emerged from the same ancestral stock. The crab-eating fox, the colpeo, and more than a dozen other species all trace their ancestry to the pioneers that crossed the isthmus millions of years before. Another pathway opened repeatedly between Alaska and northeastern Asia. During periods of lower sea level, the broad Bering Land Bridge provided repeated opportunities for canids to enter Eurasia. Once established across that vast continent, different populations adapted to climates ranging from frozen northern plains to temperate forests and dry grasslands. The wolf lineage diversified into gray wolves, Ethiopian wolves, and jackals. Foxes spread across Eurasia and into Africa, producing 12 living species today, all descended from those North American ancestors. The dholes evolved in South and Southeast Asia, developing a pack hunting coordination unlike that of any other canid. Africa received its canids through Eurasian intermediaries. Jackals arrived in 3 distinct species, filling ecological niches across the continent's diverse habitats. The African wild dog emerged as one of the most efficient hunters on Earth, achieving hunting success rates between 70 and 90%, surpassing every other large carnivore on that continent. Yet none of these achievements would have been possible without the original diversity generated in North America. The final crossing carried transformative significance. Approximately 23,000 years ago in Siberia, wolves began tolerating human presence. The mechanism was simple. Wolves gained access to food scraps around human camps, while humans benefited from the animal's alertness and hunting abilities. Across countless generations, this association became domestication. The dogs that emerged from this partnership crossed the Bering Land Bridge with human migrants returning to North America approximately 15,000 years ago. Canids were coming home, but transformed into something entirely new. Today, the canid family includes 37 living wild species, occupying every continent except Antarctica. More than 900 million domestic dogs live alongside human communities worldwide, making them the most numerically abundant large carnivore on Earth by an enormous margin. All of this traces back to a single North American origin, to the same evolutionary pressures that also produced Epicyon haydni and 65 other Borophagian species. The overlooked branch inherited everything. Every behavior a dog performs carries a history written into its body. Some of that history arrived recently, shaped by 15,000 years of partnership with humans. Other behaviors run far deeper, reaching backward through wolves and the Canidae branch to a time when North America belonged to predators that no longer have names in any living memory. The dog sleeping beside you tonight carries those ancient pressures within its nervous system, expressing them through gestures that still make sense in a world they were never designed for. Pack coordination reveals itself in small moments. When a domestic dog glances back at its handler during a walk, checking that the human remains close before continuing forward, it performs a behavior that traces to wolves hunting prey together across open plains. That brief orientation, that waiting, that sense of group cohesion descends from Miocene canids who could not succeed alone. The modern dog recognizes its human family as a pack. The ancient instinct to stay connected, to coordinate movement, to wait for the group survives intact, simply redirected toward new companions. Food caching behavior puzzles owners whose dogs have never faced hunger. A dog will bury a bone or treat despite having constant access to meals, following an impulse that belongs to a different world. In that world, a single kill provided more nourishment than one predator could consume immediately. Competitors surrounded every carcass. Surplus food buried in the ground became survival insurance. The behavior persists millions of years later, encoded so deeply that hunger cannot erase it. Resource guarding follows the same logic. The low growl when another animal approaches a dog's bowl records an ancient contest over bones at a carcass site, a struggle between predators for access to marrow. The howl carries across vast distances, and dogs retain this capability despite no longer needing it. Wolves use howls to coordinate pack movements and announce territory boundaries, sounds that travel several miles through open terrain. Domestic dogs howl when sirens wail or other dogs call, triggered by sounds that mean nothing in their immediate survival. The neural pathways for producing and responding to long-distance vocal communication remain active because they were essential to ancestors for whom communication across miles meant successful hunts and maintained family bonds. In the grasslands where Borophagines and early wolves moved, vocalizations like these would have echoed across the plains, coordinating pack activity and maintaining contact among separated individuals. The canine nose represents perhaps the deepest inheritance of all. Dogs possess approximately 300 million olfactory receptors compared to the 6 million available to humans. The brain regions dedicated to processing scent are, proportionally, 40 times larger in a dog than in a person. This capability was not evolved for a suburban environment. It developed across millions of years as the primary tool for tracking prey over distance, reading the physiological states of other animals, and navigating the social landscape of a pack through chemical signals. When a dog investigates a fire hydrant, it processes information about every animal that has passed, their sex, their hormonal state, their diet, their health status. Seconds of sniffing convey what would take a human investigation to discover. The dog and Epicyon never met. They belonged to different branches of the canid family, separated by tens of millions of years of independent evolution. Yet they inhabited the same Miocene plains and faced identical ecological pressures. They hunted in communities, competed over carcasses, communicated across distances, and developed social behaviors adapted to a world of pack coordination and resource scarcity. The behaviors encoded in the dog's ancestors were written in the same landscape where Epicyon's bones now rest. When a dog circles before lying down, checking the ground as wild ancestors once checked for snakes, it performs a gesture older than domestication itself, rooted in a time that persists within the animal, despite everything else having changed. The fossils of Epicyon lie scattered across a continent, each discovery a small window into a world that vanished millions of years before human beings arrived to study it. These bones did not all emerge at once from the earth. They arrived slowly, unearthed by erosion and excavation across more than a century and a half of paleontological work, each specimen adding another detail to an incomplete but steadily clarifying picture. Nebraska holds the original story. The Miocene formations of western Nebraska, the same geological layers that produce the celebrated Badlands fossils of South Dakota, yielded the type specimens of Epicyon haydeni. Joseph Leidy based his 1858 description on these bones, the specific material that defined the species for science. The White River Formation and its equivalents still expose ancient sediments cut by modern erosion, revealing floodplains and grasslands from the Miocene interior. Every spring, rain brings new material to the surface, and Nebraska remains one of the most productive sources of Epicyon remains. Texas presents a different kind of evidence. The Panhandle's Clarendonian and Hemphillian beds have preserved Epicyon alongside the richest known assemblage of coexisting predators and prey. Coffee Ranch, in particular, stands as a window into Epicyon's competitive world, a single site that has yielded Epicyon, Barbarophilus, Amphimaturotus, Agriotherium, and Borophagus in close association. That concentration of carnivores, all competing for the same resources, reveals the predator guild in which Epicyon operated. Late Hemphillian deposits from the Texas Panhandle also record Epicyon validus with rhinoceroses and primitive gomphotheres, extending the known prey range to even larger targets. Montana fossils establish that Epicyon was not confined to a single region. Specimens from the northern Great Plains prove the species extended northward toward what would become the Canadian border, demonstrating that Epicyon was a truly continental presence. Florida's Miocene fossil beds rank among the richest in North America, with the Clarendonian faunas of the Lovebone bed producing both Epicyon savis and Epicyon haydeni in the southeast. That southern fauna included the complete complement of its ecosystem, from three-toed horses to giraffe-camels to massive hippo-like rhinoceroses. The coast-to-coast distribution documented from California to Florida confirms Epicyon as a continent-spanning species at its height, not a localized population. Alberta, Canada, marks the northern limit of confirmed finds, yet those Canadian deposits remain less thoroughly studied than American formations. Kansas contributed another crucial specimen in 1999, when material recovered south of Young Brothers Ranch allowed formal naming of Epicyon aeolurodontoids, the intermediate third species. That discovery established the entire Epicyon genus was spread across the continental interior. The incomplete record contains within it the possibility of discovery. The fossil record preserves only a fraction of the animals that lived. For every Epicyon specimen resting in a museum collection, others remain buried in exposed formations that no paleontologist has yet surveyed systematically. Erosion cuts through badlands only certain times of year. Some sediments have not yet been exposed to the surface. The 2024 recognition of Epicyon haydni as the largest known canid prompted renewed attention, generating new fieldwork and analyses of existing material. Somewhere in the rock, an Epicyon femur may be pointing out of a hillside, waiting for the rain or the season that will bring it to light. The story continues to unfold. At the beginning of this story stood an animal 8 feet long, heavier than a gorilla, its jaw capable of cracking bone that no other predator on the continent could access. For 15 million years, it shaped the world around it, a dynasty that seemed as permanent as the landscape itself. Now nothing remains alive that descended from it. What persists comes in different forms. Museum specimens sit in temperature-controlled rooms, cataloged and measured. Specimen LACM 7756/154454 rests in Los Angeles, while type specimens lie in Nebraska and Coffee Ranch material in Texas. These bones, numbered and preserved, represent a dynasty that ended 2.5 million years ago without leaving descendants. They are the physical evidence of an extinction so complete that it erased an entire branch of the canid family tree. Yet other legacies endure in ways less visible. The soil of the Great Plains accumulated partly through Epicyon's work, through millions of years of crushed bones returning their minerals to the earth. That soil, built from the processed remains of creatures that Epicyon hunted and consumed, now supports the agriculture that feeds a continent. The predator dissolved into the landscape, becoming substrate. The modern dog carries something different. It does not inherit Epicyon's genetics or its anatomy. The Borophaginae left no living descendants, no continuation of their lineage. Instead, the dog descends from the Canidae branch that survived in Epicyon's shadow for tens of millions of years, the overlooked generalists that eventually became everything. The dog's pack coordination, its howl, its food-guarding behavior, its social architecture, all trace to pressures that shaped Epicyon's ancestors too. They shared the same Miocene plains, faced the same prey, competed in the same predator communities. The behaviors encoded in the dog's nervous system emerged from that shared world, though through different evolutionary choices and different survival strategies. The pronghorn still runs at speeds exceeding 62 miles per hour across open country. That velocity does not reflect escape from Epicyon, which was too slow to chase it. Instead, the pronghorn carries within its body the pressure of something equally ancient and equally gone, a predator whose name is lost to time. The ghost of that threat remains written in the nervous system of an animal that has never stopped fleeing. The time separating now from then resists ordinary comprehension. Epicyon haydni disappeared 5.3 million years ago. Our species has existed for approximately 300,000 years. We built cities 5,000 years ago. We recorded history 4,000 years ago. All of recorded human civilization represents less than 1/10 of the time since Epicyon's final breath, somewhere in a Miocene landscape. That gulf between then and now is not the ancientness of Rome or Egypt, where human memory and archaeology can still reach. It is geological ancientness, a time so distant that it requires a completely different orientation of mind to hold it. The world Epicyon inhabited transformed completely, repeatedly, into something else entirely. The dog has lived with humans for at least 15,000 years, traveling to every continent, shaped into hundreds of breeds, from tiny to enormous. None of that descent traces through Epicyon. The largest canid ever lived left no living children, only bones. The dog exists because another branch of the canid family survived in that shadow, made different choices, paid different costs, and endured through changing worlds. The dog is Epicyon's contemporary's descendant, the overlooked lineage that outlasted the giant. The bone remains in the museum. The dog continues breathing. Both are part of the same 40 million year story that has not yet ended.